Hi everyone. So today we're going to look at paraphrasing, which is an important IELTS skill because it's a necessary component of your introduction for writing task 2 and also for academic writing task 1. So to paraphrase simply means to express a sentence in different words or to express an idea in different words. And there are a million ways that this can be done. And for students of English, that is exactly the problem. There are so many different ways that a sentence can be paraphrased that it becomes very confusing, and it's easy to make errors when we try to paraphrase sentences. And so today we're going to talk about the safest way that I know of to paraphrase sentences without getting into trouble with grammar or with coherence by inadvertently changing the meaning. Now, for those of you who are watching this, congratulations. You're actually going to get a head start on the other students because the question that I'm going to use as our example today is in fact tomorrow's task 2 writing exercise. And so if you add do you agree or disagree, then you know what you're going to be receiving for your writing exercise tomorrow. So let's look at it. Now, the question reads, although many people value their public parks, this space could be better used for other purposes, such as residential areas or to develop a business and boost economies. Okay, so that's the writing question for tomorrow. But for today's purposes, we're going to think about how we would go about paraphrasing a question like this. And the first point I want to make is that when you paraphrase, it is not necessary to change every single word in the sentence. We see this a lot in essay writings. A student will take a question like this and paraphrase it by saying, even though a multitude of persons place great store in their non-private open spaces, or something like that. They're trying to change every word, and the meaning starts to get lost and the language starts to become overly complex. So please remember that when you paraphrase, it is not necessary to paraphrase every single word. The safest way to paraphrase is to look at synonyms, and so words that have the same meaning. But we have to take some care when we look at synonyms because not all synonyms are exact, and not all synonyms will work with the same surrounding language. And so we need to make sure that if we use a synonym, that it is one that is an exact match, and that we don't need to change any of the grammar or the sentence structure around it. So looking at our sample question here, where are some opportunities for us to insert synonyms? Although, do we have a synonym for although? Well, yes, even though is a pretty close synonym for although. Could you use, do you think, despite? Well, if you look in a dictionary of synonyms for although, you might see despite listed there. The answer is, if you wanted to use despite, you couldn't use it as a straight swap. To say, despite many people value their public parks is not grammatical. So if you wanted to use despite, you would need to change the language that surrounds it, and you would say, despite the fact that many people value their public parks. So be aware that sometimes when we paraphrase, we need to make other adjustments to the language. Now, many people, we have people. Do we have a paraphrase for people? Can we say persons? Generally, no. I see persons paraphrased, given as a paraphrase for people quite often in essays. It doesn't read naturally. Persons often has a more formal meaning to it. And so I would refrain from using persons as a paraphrase for people. You might use citizens, but in most cases I would be tempted to leave people unchanged and look at some other targets. The easiest targets to work on when we're looking at paraphrasing are nouns. So nouns can normally be paraphrased without the need to change too much of the surrounding language, and your chances of creating grammatical problems for yourself by paraphrasing nouns is much less. So if you look at our question here and we pick out the nouns, so we've already covered off people, public parks. Now, can we paraphrase public parks? Well, public has a fairly unique meaning. I don't think we can look at that. And that's the adjective anyway. But parks, do we have any synonyms for parks? Well, yes, open spaces, green belt perhaps, if you're familiar with that term. So you could put in, although many people value their public open spaces, and that would contain exactly the same meaning. Looking on, we then have space. So if you've paraphrased public parks as open spaces, then you wouldn't want to use space in the next line because you'd be repetitive. And so you would need a synonym for space, and so you might use area, for example. And so this area could be better used for other purposes. Now, do we have a synonym for purposes? Well, uses would work here. So you could say this area could be, no, you wouldn't use uses because we've got the verb to use in here already. So to say that it could be used for other uses, would be repetitive, and we would like to avoid that. So we would probably leave purposes unchanged here. Residential areas. So residential adjective, areas is the noun. Do we have a paraphrase for areas? Yeah. Residential zones would work just fine here. Or to develop business and boost economies. So business, we have a paraphrase. We could say commerce, or we could say industry, potentially. So, or to develop industry and boost economies. Now, economies has got a fairly specific meaning, and so you could, if you had a good economics vocabulary, you might be able to come up with something technical like GDP, but it would also be perfectly acceptable to simply leave economies unchanged. So the low risk way of paraphrasing is to, one, recognize that you don't need to paraphrase every single word, and number two, to concentrate on the nouns in the question and look for synonyms that you can be confident can be inserted that will retain the meaning and will not lead to any grammatical problems. So I hope that's been of help, and good luck with your writing tomorrow. Thank you.